Hi, this is Dan from Millsit. I'm here today to talk about email authentication and how authentic it is or it isn't, and what things you need to do in DNS to make sure that your email lands in someone's inbox. I've been through this before, about 5 years back. I'm updating this video because recently in 2024, Google and Yahoo announced if you don't have a compliant DMARC record published in your DNS, they're likely to junk your email. So, for if you run a business and you're marketing and you don't have this in place, they're probably not going to end up in someone's inbox and rather in their junk. So let's start right at the beginning and talk about the two records which are required in your public domain name, in your DNS zone file. What should be published? And I'm going to draw this on the screen. Okay. The first one is something called an SPF record. And that is an entry in DNS that says that what email server you're using. For example, if you host your email with Microsoft 365 or with Google, you would have in your DNS zone for your domain, and let's say your domain is my lovely writing on the screen, facepaint. Facepaint.com. Okay. You've got a domain name called facepaint.com and you've got a DNS zone file hosted with GoDaddy or Microsoft, or could be a different 1,000 DNS hosts around the world. In your DNS zone file, there's an SPF record. It's a clear text record, and in that record, the parameters of the record should state which email servers are allowed to send from your domain. Like I said, you could be sending from Microsoft 365, you could be sending from Google, you could be using services such as MailChimp, or you could be using services such as Adobe. You could have a private website hosted somewhere on a set of servers, or just one single web server. So in that SPF record, typically you would have a DNS name for services such as Microsoft and Google, and an IP address, an IPv4 address for web hosts. Now, what does that mean? So when you send an email from your domain name at facepaint.com, straight away when your email lands in the recipient's inbox, the recipient's email server does a reverse lookup on your domain name and says, hey, where's this email coming from? It will check your SPF record and it will link up where did the email come from, i.e., did it come from Microsoft 365, and are you allowed to send from Microsoft 365? And that's one tick in the box, because that's a way for DNS and for the recipient's email server to work out, is this authentic? It probably is. There's another mechanism, and that is DKIM. There we go. So, domain keys. Domain keys uses public and private infrastructure in terms of signing your email to work out, again, is it authentic. Very similar mechanism, apart from in DNS, what's actually published is a public key. And that's a long string of information which doesn't mean much to us, but essentially it's the public key to a private key which is being used on your email server to generate an email. Same sort of thing applies. You send an email from your email address at facepaint.com. And when you send that email, your email server, be it Microsoft 365, essentially puts a signature in the body of the email, which you don't tend to see in HTML emails, but there's a long string of probably around, I would say, around 20 to 40 characters long. And what that does That is the private key, or it's the key is put in your email. And when the receiving recipient receives that email, for example, if you're sending an email from facepaint.com to, let's say, Yellow Pages. We used to have Yellow Pages here in the UK. I'm not sure if it still exists yet, so no offense to Yellow Pages. Yellowpages.co.uk. You're sending an email from your domain facepaint.com to yellowpages.co.uk, and when that recipient's mailbox receive your email, it's going to check the private key, or the key it's being put into your email itself, and it's going to do a lookup online, again in the DNS zone for facepaint.com, and check to see, does the private and public key link up? Has it been tampered with? Is the encryption or the crypto part of it, is it correct? So these are two mechanisms, SPF and DKIM, which we've been using them for around, we've been using DKIM probably for around 20 years, and SPF probably exceeds the age of me. There's also one other mechanism, and that is DMARC. Let me draw it out for you. Okay. Go back to my drawing. Okay. DMARC. Okay, this is another record in DNS. It's in plain text format, and there's three answers, or there's three different types of parameters or values you can put in to your DNS zone file. What this record does is, again, it tells the recipient's email server what to do with this email. So it's not an authentication record, but it's more like a record which tells a receiving email server, if you receive an email from this host, what do you do with it? This record first came around because of essentially spam. And in modern day world, if we think about fraud and spoofing and how people spoof people's email addresses and phishing, it's kind of more relevant. And like I said, Google and Yahoo started to introduce a policy to say that if you don't have a DMARC record in your DNS zone file, and you are sending to a gmail.com or a googlemail.com address, and you don't have a record published, they're more likely to junk your email. So what does this look like in DNS, this DMARC record? Well, there's three different types of values you can have. The first value is nothing, do nothing, it equals none. The second value is quarantine. And the third value is to deny or to fail. So what does that mean? Well, let's go back to our lovely facepaint.com. We're sending an email from facepaint.com to yellowpages.co.uk. We've got an SPF record, this one at the top here, and we've also got a DKIM record in our zone file, DNS zone file of facepaint.com. These two authentication records. We send an email to yellowpages.co.uk, and that email arrives. The exchange service processing the email is doing its authentication checks, says yes, it's coming from facepaint.com, yes, and it's coming from DKI. Yep, that's correct as well. Then it checks the DMARC record, and you've got a DMARC record set up to say that to deny. Okay, but because you've passed these two checks, SPF and DKIM, your email's not going to get denied, because this part up here is authentic. So the email gets delivered correctly to the recipient's email box at yellowpages.co.uk. And that mechanism is correct. However, say, for example, one of your competitors in the market called, let's call them, let's draw this out. We're going to call them Lace Paint. lacepaint.com. Sounds like face paint, doesn't it? But it starts with an L. The thing about domain names these days is that you can register almost any domain name, and you can accidentally, well, you could potentially register a domain name to make it sound like one other. But when we Google these days, sometimes we accidentally put in the wrong domain names. And it's true, there's lots of fraudulent domain names set up on the internet to catch people out. So sometimes they think they're visiting where they should be visiting, but actually it's a fraudulent or spoofed website. So, for example, lacepaint.com was set up by someone. It could be legitimate, it could be fraudulent, but the point is it's been set up. Someone sends an email to yellowpages.co.uk. They are pretending to come from facepaint.com. They don't have an SPF record and they don't have a DKIM record. So this domain doesn't have either of these records, but they're pretending to come from facepaint.com. And they're sending to yellowpages.co.uk. What happens is when that email is received at yellowpages.co.uk, because in your facepaint.com DNS zone file, in your DMARC record, you have a record that's set up to say deny or fail. Because it doesn't pass these two record checks, the SPF and DKIM, straight away, what the recipient's host does is it bins the email or it junks it because it hasn't passed its two authentication mechanisms. And the DMARC record says, well, if it doesn't pass it, bin it, fail it. If it was set to quarantine, what that happens, it depends on the recipient's email server, is it normally puts it in a whitelist or something to be released. It could junk it. It could allow the recipient's mailbox user to fetch it out from junk and put it back into the inbox. So this mechanism is really important, and it's been around again probably before I was born, but these days it's been used more and more to stop spoofing because of cybersecurity as well, and email hosts are trying to take more responsibility these days. The other great thing about a DMARC record and using third-party software such as DMARC Record Checker, there's DMARC Advisor, there's quite a few third-party SaaS services on the internet, is that once you have a third-party tool set up and you're able to populate all your domain names, if you've got maybe 5 or 10, what the third-party software does is it gives you an audit trail. You send email day to day, you set up your DMARC records. So, for example, the third-party software receives those. We won't receive the email, but it receives an XML file. And that XML file will tell you if your email is potentially being spoofed elsewhere on the globe and how good your SPF and your DKIM records are, and if there's any errors around them. So, in terms of how we've moved on in 2024, the authentication and SPF and DKIM we've been using for a while. It's still in use, and it's very, very important that they are correct. But how DMARC is now coming into light is because mail hosts want to take responsibility, and the days of too much email and spam in your mailbox hopefully will be less and less, and we can pretty much guarantee the email we receive is authentic. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It's been something, an explainer to understand a bit about the email process and the authentication process. But don't hesitate to reach out if you are looking to put some of this in place in your business or need some further advice.